Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now on the starting slide. Okay, hello. This is Open Wisdom's introduction to Year 12. Essentially, it will be a HSC guide, and it will be presented by, myself, Carmen, as well as Paul. All right, and this will be our agenda. So first, we're going to talk about the Year 12 progression, as well as the importance of rank. We're also going to be touching on scaling, but not too much because you guys have already picked your subjects, and even if you do bad scaling subjects, you can't really change that. Okay, and the third point would be an English study guide, and the fourth point would be a science study guide. Okay, so before we get started, let's just talk about some Zoom etiquette. Please pay attention to the mute button. It will just be really annoying if there's background noise on your end and we're trying to speak. So just be careful of that. And in the event that Zoom does log us out, just jump back in using the same link and the same password. Okay, and you can also type questions into the chat. Okay, and this will be answered either at the end or just throughout, depending on the type of question. Okay, so in terms of asking questions, if you already know this, that's great. But in case for people who don't, if you want to remain anonymous with asking questions, just click on this and select either myself or Paul to whoever the question is directed to. All right, yeah, can you please put yourself on mute, whoever's, was that? Yeah, so you can direct questions to either myself or Paul through this if you want to remain anonymous, because this is recorded. Okay, so yeah, this is me. I go to UNSW. This is my degree. I do a Bachelor of Advanced Science. I major in Chemistry and Material Science. I'm one of the tutors here at Open Wisdom. These are various things about myself. But anyways, moving on. So I'm going to talk about why Year 12 and Year 11 matters, I suppose, primarily Year 12, and why your internal rank matters. Okay, so the Year 12 progression, we have Term 1, Term 2, Term 3, Term 4, and then you have your HSC exam. Every term, you usually get an assessment. I mean, sometimes schools skip an assessment per term and they put 2 assessments in one term. Doesn't really matter, but it averages out to 1 assessment per term before you get into HSC exam. Okay, and your assessment 1 to 4 results, they give you your subject rank in that year. Okay, and then you do your HSC exam. So your subject rank in your school determines your HSC assessment mark or your internal mark, and your HSC exam would give you your HSC exam mark, which is your external mark, and your overall HSC mark is the average of that. So you might have heard when people describe the HSC marks, internal mark and external mark. This is just what it means. Your internal mark is based on your rank, while your external mark is based on your actual HSC score. Okay. So why does NESA ignore your school mark? Well, this is because each school has its own exam papers, which are different to another school's, and the difficulty will vary across schools. So if you go to the worst school in your state, but you're the top student in the worst school in the state, that doesn't necessarily mean you're the top student in like a mid-tier school. So NESA takes that into account, like maybe more difficult schools mark more harshly, and they take that into account, which is why they only take rank into account. So yeah, if NESA takes into school mark, then every school will reward its students with like a really high mark because they obviously want the students to do well. So in the end, you study hard for the rank, you don't really study hard for the mark. Okay, and just to elaborate on this a bit more, we'll include an example. So let's say we have 5 students and this is their Year 12 final report marks and this is their rank. So obviously person A did the best, they got top rank, person B the second best, they got second rank, and so on and so on. Okay, now let's apply this to what this means by your internal rank. Okay, so student A, yeah, we know this, the HSC exam mark is 95. The moderated assessment mark is 95, and the HSC assessment mark would be the average of their internal mark, which is the moderated mark, as well as their external mark, which is this mark. Okay, and they get 95. Now, let's have 2 more rows. So student B has a HSC mark of 80, while student C has a HSC mark of 90. Notice how student B did internally better, like it's a better rank, That means they kind of steal student C mark, and they take that mark, and that takes into account their average. So it's not student B gets 80, student B gets the second highest mark because they were the second best in their school. And because student C was the third best, they take, the third best mark, and as well, that becomes moderated to 80. So it would be external mark plus internal mark, the average of that, and that will be 85. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, just feel free to type questions in the chat. Okay, and the rest is pretty standard. Fourth best person gets the fourth best mark, and that would just be the average of that as well. Okay, so now to touch on about scaling. Okay, so let's say we have two students. Person does advanced math and English standard. Okay, so we all maybe realize that English standard doesn't scale as well as English advanced. However, they both got a band 6, right? And the scale mark isn't that much different. I mean, it's 0.2 compared to, it's a difference of 0.2. Maths extension 1, the difference is a bit greater because these are 2 levels apart. Okay, but in short, if you get a lower raw mark, then scaling plays a factor. So this person got 80 and 80 in English standard and English advanced. That means the scale mark is 64 compared to 60. So it's greater than a 0.2 difference, as we saw in the previous slide. Okay, and that's what this graph shows. So the greater your raw mark, the less of an effect scaling plays. So just because you do bad scaling, like maybe business studies, sorry to anyone who does business studies, but it doesn't scale too well, you can still get a really high scaled mark if you absolutely smash the final exam, because scaling doesn't really play a factor around the high brackets. If you get a really low mark, well, scaling does play a factor, like 65 gets scaled down to 30, while let's say extension 2 does get scaled down that much. So short thing is just do well if you can. Okay, so I'm going to pass it on to Paul, and he's going to talk about some study tips for general study tips as well as English. All right, so I'm going to pass to Paul now.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Paul. I am one of the English tutors here at Open Wisdom. So a little bit about myself is basically I go to University of Sydney. I do Bachelor of Arts and Advanced Studies in Politics and International Relations. And for my HSC, I did 4 units English, so I got 47 out of 50, so which is 94%. And for 4 units, I did 46 out of 50, which is 92%. And I'm also a student public and student editor for one of my university's journal, Political Science. So I basically edit academic papers here and there. So that's a little bit about myself. So before I go into the specific tips for English, I want to look into the general editorial study tips. So basically, this is how I kind of want to go about doing styling my study. So the steps of learning. So it's first to familiarize myself or yourself with the content and material of your subjects or whatever it may be, English, math, science, and to understand what the content is asking of you and the expectations and requirements. And also to apply that understanding and that content into practice questions, which will probably get you to that band 6 mark. And finally, when you have done all that 3 steps, and to revise, to make it second nature. So when it comes to the HSC exams, you just absolutely smash it. So passive review is under the heading of familiarize yourself. So when you do passive review process, it basically just means processing your material passively, without testing yourself in the process. It's not the same thing as copying notes from your textbook without understanding the content first. It's not the same thing as rereading the passage to memorize it. It's also not the same thing as rewriting notes to learn about the content, because you need to first understand it. So to do passive review is to basically break down your content into shorter sections. This will help you to retain a lot of the information in an effective and productive way. And you want to read the passage very slowly and carefully. So don't read too fast because you might miss out very specific key points that you might regret later on. Please mute yourself if you were speaking. Explain the content to someone else. So this is the Feynman technique, where if you understand what you're talking about, then you should be able to explain it really well to someone else. And once you can do that, then it shows that you have a solid grasp of your material and that knowledge. And also, you can also do it the other way. Ask someone to explain the content to you. And if you understand what they're talking about, then you probably understand the very key aspects of that content. Step 2 is active recall. So the goal of active recall is to figure out what you don't know about and what is the gaps basically in your knowledge, and is to understand the content more deeply too. So active recall relies on your memory to answer questions without looking at notes or flashcards, whatever. And it's testing your understanding as you go along your journey or your progression into becoming a more able, I guess, student to remember your content. And so to apply it is, once the content makes sense to you and you have understand the key aspects of it, and you can explain it without assistance. The examples here would be to explain the content to yourself or to your tutor, so to me or to Carmen, and also ask yourself relevant questions and answer them. When you ask yourself questions based on the content material, you realize that if you're able to structure your response in a way that answers the question, then you probably know that, okay, I'm applying my knowledge and I'm also understanding what is asked me to do. You also want to write detailed notes explaining what you know. So more than just understanding it, but if you're able to write it out in a very detailed manner, then that will save you a lot of time for the HSC. And also you can present the information in a diagramical form or table. So this applies more so to science and to math, having visual key diagrams, which can help you memorize more easily than just a long slab of paragraphs. You can also do that for English when it comes to textual analysis, or you're finding evidence and techniques for your essay. I recommend this to all my students, but I recommend to write it in a very table-like manner, or diagramical, because it will just help you a lot to understand, but also organize your knowledge. Step 3 is practice questions. So how to apply that is get feedback on all your questions. So ask your tutors for feedback, or one of your friends to give you feedback on what you think your answers are like. And after you receive feedback from whoever, rewrite your answers again. So don't just annotate where you think you can do better, but actually do it and answer your question. And also avoid multiple choice questions initially, because they are probably the most easiest to prepare for. So we kind of want to begin with the more harder short responses and go into the much more easier sections of the English and also the science and mathematical papers. Attempt a variety of question types. So not just in English, but also in science and math, you'll be given different questions depending on what module you're studying. So it's good to familiarize yourself with all the different question types. So when it comes to the HSC exam, you'll not be surprised and shocked and go, oh my God, I did not prepare for this. I don't know what to do. So it's good to familiarize yourself with a variety of question types, whatever subject you are taking. And also, once you have done your answers, do them after a few days until you find them easy to do. Well, this is quite straightforward why. And the reason why is because in the HSC exam, it saves you a lot of time for time management and productive writing time. And also for science and maths, not for English, show all your working out, because your marker want to know how you get there. And what is more important is your working out rather than the answer itself. Okay, and step 4, lastly, is spaced repetition. So the goal for spaced repetition is to move information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. So essentially becoming a second nature to your memory. So it's also to reduce stress by spreading out your revision. Knowing that your HSC is one-year course along one-year journey is also important to kind of organize when you should revise and what notes and knowledge you should revise. So that is why spaced repetition is important. And you can see in this graph that when you first learn it, it becomes much more easily memorized or easily to retain the memory, the knowledge, as you go by the elapse in days and the time between those days. So I'll be presenting English study tips, which is my specialty. And for English, I say this to all my students, but English is a very difficult subject to master because unlike science or maths, it does not offer any clear-cut solutions or answers to questions. And I'm sure that you have probably seen those sample answers from NASA, and they are basically gatekeeping what a band 6 answer should look like. And it's quite unfair for the English student to know what the hell I'm going to do. So for the sake of that, English can be a very difficult subject for students to navigate through the expectations and requirement for them. However, the good thing about English is it's a very flexible and versatile subject. So unlike math or science, which has a very rigid structure to way of answering them and to study them, English enables students to approach the question and your style of studying in your own way, in a way that you enjoy. So do not worry if it's hard right now, because it doesn't have to be a difficult subject for you. And if you follow these effective tips, I mean, I can't promise, but I can guarantee that you'll succeed in the HSC. So the first tip I give is to understand the modules. So everything you need to know about English is found in your rubric or your module prescriptions. So they are your ultimate guides and your friend to what you need to explore, to analyze, and to discuss in your responses, whether it be short responses or essay responses. And the reason why it's important to understand the modules and to keep it in your memory is because all the questions in the HSC will be based on the different aspects of the module's prescription. So here we see that within, this is a sample question from our own booklet at Open Wisdom. But if I was to read it, within text 1, the cover of the New Yorker magazines represents the diverse experiences of many individuals sharing a living space, depicting the varying values, behaviors, and motivations. The vector lines utilize draws the audience attention to the diverse and different activities individuals are partaking in on the balconies. The bold red color of the salsa dances greatly contrasts the individual doing yoga on the balcony, further emphasizing the diversity of experiences within the text. The symbol of the man doing yoga demonstrates his preference for peaceful activities, which directly juxtapose the barbecue saying, party saying above him. Thus, text 1 is able to demonstrate the vast diverse experiences within individuals in a living space. So already in the question, what makes that sample answer really well is not only the analysis and the structure, it's also the incorporation of the common module, key terms, and concepts. So here it will be depicting the varying values, behaviors, and motivations, and so forth. When you also see in emphasizing the diversity of experiences, and in the concluding sentence, the diverse experience within individuals in a living space. And already you can know that when you write your short responses, the module should help you with what to write about and the direction that your responses should go to. Here, the student has directed their responses towards what? The varying values, behaviors, and motivations. And already by incorporating that in your responses, it sets a framework of what you need to address, to analyze, and explore. So essentially, key terms and concepts of the module acts as a bridge between your analysis and the question. And this is primarily achieved by incorporating your key terms and concepts from the module into your response. So I highly recommend you guys to memorize the key terms and concepts, and also to incorporate as much as you can to create a very substantial and consistently argued essay or short response. Tip 2 is to make extensive notes of the text. So this is important in constructing a very complex and substantial analysis of your text. And the idea, the principle is the more extensive your notes are, the easier it is to write your response under exam conditions. And this is important because there are cases where you may write the wrong author and or text. And this has happened to my friend, who in his common module essay had talked about T.S. Eliot instead of Shakespeare. And he got a really bad mark because of that one very simple mistake. So you might not think it happened to you, but it happens to the best of us, to my friend, and to virtually most of my students here I've taught. And you might receive a mind blank. That's common. And it does happen. And when it does happen, there's nothing you can do except to think. So it's really important that you do understand your notes, and also most significantly to understand what the text is talking about. And you may discuss the wrong ideas on themes. And this happens because a lot of the text you do, the themes overlaps, and you'd be like, oh, this is really confusing because I have to write 4 essays in my HSC. So getting the wrong ideas and themes is very common too. So to go through an example, I highly recommend that you read your text multiple times throughout the year. And this is to refresh your knowledge, to gain a much more deeper understanding of the text than you did when you first began reading it, and to basically analyze your text in a much more complex manner. And this also comes under your organization and adaptation. So that basically enables you to be more effective in your time management, and it saves you your writing time and reading time when it comes to the HSC. So to go through 2 very common texts in the common module, 1984 and The Crucible. So here I've just talked about one theme. So in 1984, there is a theme of oppressive surveillance by the Big Brother and the telescreen, as you can see in the picture. And in Crucible, there is a theme of blind allegiance or acceptance of ideology without really considering the impacts of it. And I'll show the difference of how you can just talk about the concept of oppressive surveillance or the concept of blind allegiance. You know, you can find your evidence, you can find your techniques. But you can write like that, but it doesn't really give your essay a lot of gravitas to it, a lot of substantiality. And if you add context, if you add literary concepts and character analysis and talk about the form and style of each text, then when the marker reads it and marks your papers, then they'll be like, oh, this student knows so much more than the average student. And automatically is a band 6 because you have incorporated more beyond what the criteria is asking of you to do. So in that sense, this is why talking about making extensive notes about the text is really important. And to do that, I recommend that you memorize your key themes. And so I'll suggest to memorize more than just 3, just in case you forget on the day. Memorize key concepts. So what perspective or frameworks is the composer using in the text? So for example, in 1984, you can use the ideology of authoritarianism to explore the theme of oppressive surveillance. And by doing that, you give your analysis a much more stronger backbone and framework. Context, so talk about why the author has included this and what has influenced them to include it. And the one thing I always say to my student is, when you do English and when you analyze text in English, everything that the author writes is deliberate and on purpose. And so when you see something that may seem minor and like this, oh yeah, it's not that important, it's important and is there for a reason. And it can be used to further enhances your complexity of your essay. And also to memorize your textual analysis, which is quite straightforward, because if you don't memorize the textual analysis, then you virtually have nothing to write about in essay. So I recommend you to go and do that throughout the year, because trust me, when it may seem quite, chill and relaxed for now, but when it comes to the HSC, you're going to be very busy because you'll be studying not only English, but your other subjects. So I recommend you to start very early and to organize at a very early date. Tip 3 is master the structure of analytical writing. So structure is as equally important as writing a substantial analysis. And I would even go to say that it's much more important than writing an analysis. I'm sure you have teachers that told you this, but there are cases where students don't have enough time to finish the essay. And instead of writing a conclusion, they just kind of finish off with the body paragraph. Compared to another students who have not written a lot, but has finished with a conclusion, the question is, who gets the marks? And the answer is the student has wrote a conclusion. And the reason why is that student receives more mark is because even though you have a substantial analysis and a very good body paragraph, your essay is essentially incomplete. And that incomplete structure, your marker is also examining, and it shows that you don't know how to write an essay. So it's always important to finish and to memorize and to master the structure of essay or of any short responses. So the good thing about that is structure is a very easy concept to memorize and to develop. You just have to find your own style of writing. So keep practicing, keep writing your responses. And also when you do find your own style of structure, your own style of writing, be consistent with it throughout your essay and keep it sustained, because it's better to be good in one style of writing than to kind of, I don't know, write in another person's style that you barely know how to do. So structure is important because it will systematically organize your ideas in ways that enhances your response and in ways that makes your ideas much more clear and expressive to the marker. And it presents your themes in a very attractive manner, in a way that the marker will be like, oh my goodness, this student has written so much in a very easy way that I can read. Because trust me, when the HSC marker marks a paper, they're not only marking your paper, they're marking 400 of other students. And so just imagine sitting down for 6 hours in the room, marking the same paper, marking the same question, and the same analysis. You want to kind of stand out from that. And structure is one of the best way to do that. So these are the styles of structure that you could include. So PIL, you probably heard that already from your junior years of high school. So PIL just means point, example, extrapolation, and link. You have still, which is just a very different variation of PIL, but it's just statement, technique, example, extrapolation or expansion, and linking. And TS, which is just means topic sentence, elaboration, example, analysis, and synthesis. So it doesn't really matter what structure you use, but the common idea here is you have your topic sentence, your textual analysis, and your linking statement. So these are the problems students faces when they, consider structure in their writing. So the three main problems I see is verbosity and unnecessary technicality. So verbosity just means you just put in so much complex words into your essay because it might make your essay looks really nice, but it doesn't, because if you have no idea what those words mean, it just makes your essay much more unclear and quite ugly to the marker to read. So avoid that, and also unnecessary technicality. So I always say to my students, always choose relevant techniques and examples. Don't just jam everything in because it shows your knowledge. That's not the way you should show your knowledge. The way that the marker wants you to show your knowledge is through your controlled use of language and material and knowledge. And so that is much more important than just chucking everything in your essay. Unorganized ideas and concepts. I have seen students basically write one analysis here and then write a whole different analysis here and then go back to the same analysis and go back and forth. And I'm just reading that and I have to do it like 5 times over again because I just don't understand where they're going and what the point is. And so having a very organized ideas and concepts will help your marker save a lot of time and will probably give you a much more better feedback because I know how it feels to read a very unorganized paragraph and it's not great. And also one-sided discussion. So I see some students who analyze one theme or gives too much focus in one body paragraph than the other. And what usually happens is, especially under time condition, when you have 45 minutes to write, you lose your momentum And when you lose your momentum, you lose your consistency and style. And when you lose your style and your consistency, you basically just, you're lost. You're lost already. And there's no way you can revive it back because you won't get your time back. So structure is important to you, saving your time and also saving your entire essay in case you forget something or you just can't recall what to write about. To go through some examples is, I would say practice these components of analytical writing. So introduction is, you probably know a lot of these stuff, but I will say to recap again, thesis statement. So address the question and incorporate the keywords and concepts from the common module. Sorry, not from the common module, but from any module you're doing. And also from the questions, the keywords from the questions. Incorporate key module terms, elaboration of content and context. So don't just incorporate your themes, but also talk about what you're going to talk about. Elaborate upon your theme. So give a brief survey, a brief overview of your content, and also link it to the context of the composer, because it shows there's a strong linkage, a strong analysis between the composer and their context and the themes and the theories or the concepts that is explored in the text. And also link to the question. Linking shows this consistency and your sustained style of writing, which, trust me, helps the marker knows where you're going and what you're talking about. Body paragraphs, so again, topic sentence. Talk about your central argument you're going to talk about in that specific body paragraph. Again, elaboration of content and context. Introduce your quote or example and technique. And also, this is what students forget a lot. Analyze your quote and example. Don't just put it out there and say, therefore, this shows the human experience of love. Tell me, demonstrate to me how. Maybe through context, through concept or technique, or themes even. And also link back to the question. So linking will always be consistent throughout each of the structures. In conclusion, summarize your argument in body paragraphs, briefly discuss key concepts and themes on the essay, and also link the question and the thesis statement. So don't forget to go back to a thesis statement, to your central argument, and don't forget to use the keywords again from the question and from your common module. Sorry, not common module, from your module description. And finally, do practice papers. So once you have memorized the content, you have understood everything, and you know how to write an essay, practice, apply your knowledge consistently. And the reason why I do this is it's the best way to familiarize yourself with conventions, with the very, unfair rules and laws of the HSC and the expectation of each module. Because a lot of students just say, okay, I understand what to do. I'm just going to, I understand, therefore I know how to do it. But that's not really the case. You may know how to do, you may know something to a very great depth, but that doesn't automatically assume that you know how to do it. And knowing how to do it is much more important than basically knowing to do it. So I would say go do it and practice. And another reason why is because it demystifies the whole HSC experience. Students who just begin the E12 course kind of think, oh my God, the HSC is my life. If I fail my HSC, I'm totally screwed for my entire life. That used to be me, but look at me, I survived, I'm here. And it's really not that scary. So I encourage you that doing practice papers will make you less anxious and much more prepared for that day. And it will also, because you're more or less anxious, you'll better perform in the exam conditions, which increases the chances of achieving a band 6. So why do you do practice papers? So you might panic and not sure what to do, which happens to a lot of students. And even if you do prepare, it does happen. So doing practice papers helps you to recall, okay, this is what I need to do because I'm familiar with the structure and what questions are given to me. And you simply cannot prepare for answering questions. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that you don't prepare for answering questions, like you can prepare in the sense that you can go over past questions of the HSC papers, but you simply don't know what questions they're going to give it to you on that day. So you have to think on the spot and you have to be quite fast with it because of the time limits. So because for that reason, the best way we can combat that issue or that problem is to basically have a pre-planned structure in our head and to apply that on that day. And simply because the HSC is hard. Even though you do really well in the practice papers, it's still hard, it's still difficult. And even for me, I did have my fair shares of challenges. And so this is a universal human experience for every student. So do your practice papers, and I mean, I can't promise, but I guarantee it will help you a lot to you achieving the band 6. So how do we apply this at our center at Open Wisdom Education? So for passive review, we have workbooks and guidebooks we give out to students that are uniquely formulated by our tutors. So you cannot get them anywhere else but from our center. So please come to our center. And you probably have already known those workbooks and guidebooks given to you by tutors. So they are formulated in such a way that designs in a way for you to do your best in your HSC. And a lot of the students, a lot of the tutors here for English, we teach you key lit concepts, thematical concerns, language features, and texture analysis that a lot of the teachers at school will probably go over very briefly. Essentially, they only teach you the major parts, but what we do here is look at the very more niche and nuanced specific parts that will basically build the foundation of your HSC. And for active recall, we provide feedback for improvement. So you probably already know that we set your homework for the HSC. Not for HSC, but we set your homework for every lesson. And this is not because we hate you, but because we want you to succeed in HSC. So please do your homework, and also please improve upon by the feedback that you choose give you. And we also design very appropriate questions to cater to every student's need. And we understand that every student are on a very different level on the spectrum, and that not a single student is the same. And for that reason, I think it's helpful that we design appropriate questions and that we cater in such a way that the lesson suits your needs and wants. And for practice questions, there's questions in every workbook and guidebook. We have a designated booklet with homework questions. And we also have spaced repetition. So we have revision questions to test old content in every booklet. And I'm sure I do this with my students, but for English tutors, we kind of test your knowledge by asking you what you have learned from last lesson and you go back through the content we have learned. So these are some of my tips, so don't burn out. So study smart and hard, because studying doesn't have to be monotonous and boring. It can be really fun, and you just have to find your own way of studying and be productive in how you study. So study smart and hard. Have an effective time management and organization. Organization is the key. And I say this because organization has helped me in the HSC. And so make sure you have daily study habits. So that goes back to finding your own style of studying. But once you find your comfort zone, keep going at it. Keep studying, keep going at it, and it will just become second nature to you. Take a break. Don't just study like like an idiot who just studied for 12 hours straight, because it will just exhaust you for no reason, and it's not healthy for you. And focus on your activities and hobbies you want to do, and also be hydrated. Drink water. Water will help you and save lives in so many ways. And also have a balanced life, because studying and school isn't everything to life, and there's so much more to life after the HSC. So manage your school life, balance your social life, or whatever you do outside of school. And for some exam tips I will give is read the question carefully. So don't just skim over through it. Read the question carefully. Draft an essay plan. So create an outline of what you're going to write about. This will save you a lot of time. Be mindful of the time management, because you'll only be given 45 minutes for each essay response. So be mindful of that. Look at the mark allocation of each question, because that will tell you how much you should write and how much you should be in depth about it. Be aware of your handwriting. I know that back in high school, I was probably designated the worst handwriter in my year, but I improved. And I tell you now, it's really important, because if the marker cannot read the handwriting, they just can't mark your essay. And so they have to give you a really poor mark because you just can't write. And it doesn't matter if you have a really great analysis, if they can't see it, if they can't understand it, it's your fault in the end. So be aware, improve your handwriting if your handwriting is really bad at the moment. So moving on to Carmen for her science tips.
All right, cool. And do I have control of this? Yes, I do. Okay, so Paul has done a really great, extensive English tips, and now I'm going to talk about science tips. But essentially with science, as long as you know the content, it's very easy to just answer questions. Because unlike English, I hope Paul doesn't like roll his eyes at me, but with English you can kind of BS if you don't know. You can't really do that with science. So like in science, if you forget the value of gravity, you can't exactly just put another value in there. So with science, just focus on learning the content, and it's very easy to just apply to exam tips. Okay, so my first tip would be read widely to learn. Don't just use one source. So if you just go to school and you rely on your school to provide all your resources for you, that's really bad because some schools skip whole inquiry questions, some schools skip dot points. Your school won't cover everything. I mean, maybe they might, but they can also miss something. So you must read widely to learn, whether it's through like open wisdom booklets, the internet, it doesn't matter. But you just have to make sure you cover everything. Because again, with science, you can't really BS your way through it. If you don't know something, that's like 2 marks gone. So definitely read widely to learn. Okay. But when you are reading from all these multiple sources, make sure to not go off the syllabus. Because if you go off syllabus, that is a complete waste of time, because you'll find all these like little esoteric facts that you'll never use. And you might go down a rabbit hole of learning this very niche topic in, say, chemistry that you'll never use during the HSC exam. So either follow the syllabus or just do what your tutor tells you to do. Like, because the tutor should know what would be like in the HSC and the syllabus. So ask your tutor and just make sure to not go off syllabus when you read widely. Okay, so now let's go through what the syllabus is asking. Okay, so this example is from chemistry. Sorry, people who don't do chemistry, but just apply to, I don't know, your physics and biology sciences. Okay, so this dot point is saying calculate and apply the dissociation constant Ka and pKa, whatever, to determine the difference between a strong and weak acid. Okay, so this dot point demonstrates the 2 types of questions that you would get in the HSC. So the first type of question would be the calculate questions. So definitely practice calculation questions to learn shortcuts. Okay, and shortcuts would be very useful for multiple choice questions, as well as just fact checking whether you've done a calculation correct. Like for example, you do a pH calculation and you get a pH of -30, you know immediately that that's pretty much wrong because you're familiar with it. You can't get a pH below 0, by the way. So yeah, after you practice to learn some like shortcuts, you can build yourself up to harder problems, because just like maths, you will start with the easy problems first and then you just build it up. Okay, and you practice to improve speed and minimize silly mistakes. So for example, what you should be learning right now in chemistry is equilibrium constants. So just usually equilibrium constant questions, they're super easy. You just plug your numbers into an equation and do it. But sometimes you forget to square it, you forget to cube it. You always make, especially when you're first starting out, you always make these silly mistakes that you should probably get rid of before you do the HSC. And the only way you can do that is through practicing. Okay, now the apply part of these calculation questions. The reason why you need practice is because you need to be familiar with relative values and apply them to a given situation. So as I mentioned, you do your calculation, you do it very wrong, you get a pH of negative like 30. If you know chemistry, you would know that that is impossible, so you need to double check your answer, okay? And the only way you know it's impossible is if you do a lot of practice and you know the relative areas of where your answer should be. It acts as a safeguard, and it's better than just not knowing what the answer will be. Okay, and you apply to obviously focus on your written responses as well, because even if science is very fact-based, you also have to write well, because as Paul said, no one wants to read, you know, a crap body paragraph, just like how no tutor or marker wants to read a crap short answer response. So practice to write well. Okay, so since I would love to teach you, the whole chemistry syllabus, but we don't have enough time for that. So I'm just going to teach you how to answer 1, 2, 3 mark questions, and the slide after would be like 4+ mark questions. Okay, so common HSC verbs with the 1, 2, 3 mark questions would be this: identify, outline, describe, explain, and compare. Now, these also appear in other subjects as well, like economics, maybe not so much English, but like economics, biology, physics. Like these are just common HSC verbs for 1, 2, 3 mark questions. To answer these questions, just get to the point. Try not to exceed the number of lines that the question has given you. Like if you have a lot to say, that's great, but you should be able to answer the question within the given amount of lines. Because if you write any more than that, even if you go into extreme detail, the marker is just not going to give you any more marks, because the maximum they can give you is 3 marks. So essentially, you would be wasting your time. So don't waste your time, just get to the point. Okay. Also, the second bit is that consider table form for compare questions or similar. So in some science subjects, it's quite common to get a compare question, like compare these 2 theories. For example, it's completely fine to not write a paragraph and just include a table. So like similarities and differences, for example. I find a lot of students are scared to include a table because they're not used to it. They want to like write words, which is completely fair, but just consider table form because it helps the marker see where you're going with your response, and it also prevents you from rambling. And with the table form, they can just give you ticks because it's clear that you have like similarities and differences. So don't discard this. Consider that you can include it. Okay, so these big questions are 4+ marks. So common HSC verbs here would be like explain, evaluate, and analyze. These are higher order HSC verbs that require a bit more thinking. So in the previous one, like identify, outline, describe, explain, compare, you don't have to think. You just put facts on your piece of paper and you get the marks. You don't have to think that much. But for this one, yeah, you definitely have to think. And a way to do that, depending on how many marks it is, you should plan your response before writing. Now, for 4 to 5 marks, it's probably not that important, but for marks like 6 to 9 marker questions, where they give you like a page and a half to write, definitely plan your response before writing. Because if you write half of it, you read your response, realize that it's irrelevant, cross it all out, write more. That's pretty bad because you've used half your lines and you have to like flip to the extra writing space, which is quite annoying. And also it prevents rambling. So again, even though this is a larger mark question, you do also want to get to the point. Everything that you can include, make sure it's actually relevant. Don't include, the whole chemistry syllabus in your response. Because again, that's just useless and markers will just give up reading your response. Okay, and this is maybe physics and chemistry specific. Include equations where applicable. With chemistry, you should always include a chemical equation. If you go through your HSC exam without including a chemical equation, you've done something wrong. But yeah, always include a chemical equation in chemistry. You can also include like small formulae to help you explain what you're trying to explain properly as well. So include equations if applicable, and it's also very low effort. You just write down like a couple of numbers, a couple of letters, and there's your equation. Like it doesn't take that much time, but it might give you an extra mark. Okay, so common errors in calculate question. Significant figures or rounding too early. All right, so this is chemistry specific. The rounding too early is all of science specific. Significant figures, it matters in chemistry because accuracy matters in chemistry. If you enter the real world and you do chemistry in the real world, if you're not accurate, then someone dies. In physics, I've heard from some of my students who do physics that rounding doesn't really matter, but in chemistry it does. So make sure your significant figures is like good in chemistry. And also if you round too early, that means your final answer is wrong. So that's already a mark off. Okay. And another very common error is that you complete the calculation, but you didn't answer the question. This might occur if it's like a 6-mark calculation question, you get to the end of it, you're just really tired, you want to move on, but you haven't actually concluded something. So if the question says to evaluate something or conclude something, but you haven't put like a therefore statement, like therefore this number means this, then you would have lost the mark because you haven't actually answered the question. even though you've done the calculation, you haven't answered the question. So, you lose a mark there. So there's a lot of little things that the markers can nitpick on. So just make sure to check everything. Okay, so this third point is kind of one that I'm just tired of seeing in students. Sorry, my students who are in the Zoom call, but I find a lot of students have really garbage working out. This just means please make your working out very neat. At the end, write your units, view correct significant figures, because if you go in an exam and you have garbage working out and your final answer is wrong, then the marker can't really give you carry-on errors. They can't go back and see where you went wrong because everything is just so messy. 100%, they'll just give up and be like, if it's a 4-mark calculation, they'll be like, oh, I can't even read any of this. So I'm just going to give you 2 out of 4. Got the final answer wrong, you've done something. I don't want to read this. So make sure your working out is very neatly given to the markers or to me, because yeah, if you get your final answer wrong, just much easier for them to trace back and actually like give you marks. Okay, so another really common one, especially in the HSC, is overconfidence. So I've had a student who saw a 1-mark question. He was really bright. He saw a 1-mark question. He just put the answer down, no working out, and he got it wrong. It was calculate pH, but they wrote the pH or something like that. But essentially, if you see a 1-mark question, don't underestimate it. Okay, just treat it as every other question, because if you keep getting these little marks off, that tallies up to a large proportion of your final mark. So don't be overconfident, don't be cocky, don't be like, oh, I know all this. Just read the question properly and treat it as like a hard problem. It helps minimize mistakes. Okay, so let's go through a model exam response. This is chemistry, apply to whatever subject, doesn't matter, it's the same. Okay, so this one is, all right, this is a verbal question, so it's not a calculation, it's why do both solutions have the same pH? Okay, and you're given what? 2 acids, hydrochloric acid and ethanoic acid. Okay, so I'm just going to mainly go through the structure because you probably have not learned this. This is module 6 in chemistry. At most, you would have done module 5 in school. Okay, but I wanted to show you that essentially hydrochloric acid is a strong acid and therefore fully ionizes in aqueous solutions. So the highlighted bits are the important key bits you should include. Okay, so yes, this initial thing, hydrochloric acid, strong acid, that's a fact. What's going to give you marks is that therefore fully ionizes in aqueous solutions. So yeah, the hydrochloric acid is a strong acid, that's a fact, that's a memory thing. Even if you don't know what a strong acid is, you just put that in there and like, it doesn't show anything. But if you write therefore fully ionizes in solution, that adds more depth to your answer because you actually know what like a strong acid is. Okay, and immediately afterwards, just say what like ethanoic acid is. Okay, because it says why do both solutions have the same pH? So obviously you have to distinguish between the 2 solutions. Okay, and this is the introductory line. So afterwards, we say the total concentration of ethanoic acid must be higher than HCl due to incomplete ionization. Okay, the incomplete ionization is important. And notice how we say incomplete ionization after we identify that it's a strong acid, like and or a weak acid. Okay, you don't want to say this before this because that doesn't make sense. And this also ties to what Paul has said with English as well. In chemistry and sciences, structure doesn't matter as much as English, but you should still be coherent and have a logical response, even in like humanities subjects as well. Okay, and what I mentioned previously, if you can, just include an equation. This is pH is equal to negative log 10 concentration of protons. This thing is in your formula sheet, so every chemistry student should know it. Okay, but just focus on the structure. Always relate cause to effect. Make sure you explain things in depth and make sure you get to the point. And the only way you can do this is through practice. So, if you write a response, make sure to get someone to check it because you don't want to keep writing crap responses over and over again. Otherwise, you'll develop the practice of writing crap responses. Okay, and this is a tiny slide. I'll just breeze through it. Should you write notes? Okay, so in chemistry and physics, biology, or biology not so much, but chemistry and physics, they're very conceptual. Like the whole of the first module in year 12 for chemistry can be summarized by the fact that reactions go forward and they also go backwards. Right? It's pretty simple. It's very conceptual. So some people don't write notes. And the reason why they don't write notes is that it's time consuming, and also rereading notes is a waste of time. So as Paul mentioned, with passive review, rereading notes doesn't really help you retain anything because it's just familiarity. Now, the case for writing notes, which is actually the one that I recommend. So even if it's time consuming, I would recommend writing notes because it makes sure you don't miss anything. And this is the most important thing, because I often hear students say that, oh, my school hasn't done this experiment, my school didn't go through this dot point. Oh yeah, schools don't go through everything. As I mentioned before, schools just sort of, they skip things just because like that's the way the school works, and sometimes they do things out of order. Schools are very weird. So yeah, write your own notes from the syllabus to make sure that you don't miss anything, because the HSC doesn't care whether your school didn't go through something, right? And I surely don't care, because you should have been making notes from the beginning from the syllabus. Okay, and after you write your notes, it's great because it's a concise review. Just look through it before your exam, refresh anything. And most importantly, well, the first point, most importantly, but second most importantly, I suppose, is that the process of writing helps you process concepts. And that's very good because your sciences are very conceptual, except for biology. Biology is all fact-based. Okay, now as Paul has mentioned as well, it's very important to just go through past paper questions. At this point, even though we're like, what, 5 weeks into year 12, you should already be doing past paper questions for science because you would have learned something by now. So like physics, biology, chemistry, doesn't matter. You should be doing past paper questions. Start with textbook questions because textbook questions are easy to say, that they're quite easy. And you can build it up to really hard past trial paper questions. Don't do past like extremely hard questions first, otherwise you would have wasted them, especially since you're not really good at them, at the topic. And also definitely do this, make a note of the questions you got wrong. So, have a separate A4 book, write down every single question, every single trial paper question or textbook question that you got wrong, because likely if you get it wrong and you don't remember that you made the mistake, you're going to keep repeating the mistake. So always have a separate book of just full of questions that you got wrong. And before the exam, just look through the book and familiarize yourself with your common mistakes. And yeah, please do this. Okay. So some neglected skills in like science, you need to know more than just content. Yeah, like content is like 90% of the things that you do have to know. You have to know your data analysis skills. So graphing questions, so graphing or questions on experiments. This isn't really content and something maybe your school doesn't go through because it's not really a high priority. Because graphing questions are pretty simple, right? You just plot X, plot Y, put your points, line up best fit, and it's done. But if you don't practice it, you might forget the title, you might forget the X-axis, the Y-axis, which means that you lose marks each time. So practice your data analysis skills because it's not something that's directly taught in the syllabus. It's just something that you need to know. Also, please do not neglect the depth study because as I said in the beginning of the seminar, only your rank matters, right? And your depth study, a lot of people underestimate it because it's an assignment. You can just do it at home. And when you do it at home, you can perfect it, you can hand it in, get really high marks. But then again, so can everyone else. Whenever people have take home assignments and they hand it in, everyone normally does really well because it's very easy to score high. And therefore, a lot of people neglect it, which means that even though you scored high, your rank is bad. So definitely just don't neglect your depth study. Try to secure every single mark you can. And if you want, you could always just send your tutor to depth study and make sure that what you have should be 100%. With depth study, you should be always aiming for 100%. Don't aim for 90, because that's very easy to achieve with depth studies. Okay, and just leading off the more than just content, focus on your written responses, okay? Because no one wants to read a bad response. It's going to swear just then. All right, so here's another example response for skills. Okay, so again, chemistry. Sorry, people who don't do chemistry and they're just looking at this like, what the hell's going on? It's a simple 3-mark question. And let's look at the last bit for those who don't do chemistry. Explain why this method produces inaccurate and reliable results. Is this directly testing the syllabus? No, you just have to know it. okay? And you know it through practice. So you need to know what makes an experiment inaccurate, and you need to know what makes it unreliable. The only way you can do that is, it might be kind of rude, but it's just kind of like common sense, okay? Because this is not tested, because it's pretty much common sense. You just have to know like how to make something reliable and why something is inaccurate. So this is the model answer. All right, sodium hydroxide is the primary standard. Solid sodium hydroxide is a deliquescent. That just means that sodium hydroxide absorbs water. So when you weigh sodium hydroxide, over time, it's going to appear heavier than what it actually is, because over time it absorbs water, right? That's what it means. And again, with cause and effects, we have the cause. So sodium hydroxide is a deliquescent. It absorbs water. The effect is that it lowers the concentration than expected. In your responses, no matter what type of response it is, always include cause and effect. Okay. And this is also why it's a not very reliable result or inaccurate result. The indicator chosen is inappropriate. So with a 3-mark question, it's not enough to only mention one thing. You should mention another thing to make it both inaccurate and unreliable. Okay, at least for this question, because even if you know this one fact, you're not going to get 4 marks because it doesn't show really good knowledge. You should have at least 2 and then elaborate a bit on them. Okay, here's a scary one. Here's a 9-mark question. So, yes, limestone contributes to the hardness of water by releasing calcium ions. The chemical equation for this reaction is represented below. Okay, it has been suggested by heating water reduces hardness. Okay, so it's chemistry, it doesn't matter. It's 9 marks, okay, it's really big. But this stuff, like the first like half of the question is very easy. This is the first thing you learn in year 12, equilibrium. So the 9 marks isn't going to come through you knowing which direction the reaction will shift. It's going to come from knowing whether you know this is accurately tested, or whether it's valid and whether it's reliable. Okay, and if you don't know this, then almost 1/10 of your HSC is already gone. So if you don't know what's the difference between accurate, valid, and reliable in science, definitely search it up and know it right now. Because if you get this question in the HSC, you don't know the difference between these guys, then you would have lost almost 10 marks, which is almost out of a band 6 range. So do not neglect data analysis. Yeah, this is mostly data analysis. Equilibrium, maybe like 1 mark, it's very easy. The marks come from this. So please do not neglect knowing the difference between what's accurate, valid, or reliable. Okay, so here at Open Wisdom, we teach science, obviously. In terms of learning, we have weekly content booklets that we go through with exam-style questions scattered throughout. So after we teach you something, we test you immediately afterwards, and that gives you a bit of exam practice too, and it also demonstrates top-down learning, where you learn through doing problems, because that's very important in science. Okay, and we also have a designated booklet with homework questions, so you can practice at home. Again, it's just getting that practice in them, making sure you're confident with different types of problems as well. Okay, in terms of exam practice, we have dedicated booklets based just having past paper questions and exam problems. We have many of those. Okay, and your tutors also provide you with model exam responses. Again, this just shows that the practice that you're doing isn't bad practice, because you want to always receive feedback on your responses, because you don't want to keep writing really crap responses. So you just used to writing crap responses, and in HSC, if you write crap response, then it's kind of game over. So your tutors should provide model exam responses. Okay, so that's the application at Open Wisdom if you enroll in our science courses. Okay, so in terms of what subjects we offer, some of you are already our students, maybe you're enrolled in a couple of these, but this is all we have to offer. We got maths, the sciences, English, and just other subjects that don't fit in the maths, science, and English category. So business studies, economics. We also have some Japanese tutors, which is very nice. Okay, so those are the subjects we offer. If you want to contact us for anything like a trial lesson, it's the first lesson you have with us is completely free. So if you want to contact us there, that's possible. And yeah, just you can contact us on WeChat too and email. You can also get this information off the website. Okay, so now it's a Q&A. Right, so I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see the chat when I'm sharing. All right. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right. And if you're scared about, I don't know, like typing your question in the chat, you can also like click on the drop-down menu and select either Paul or myself based on like English or science or just general stuff. Okay, no questions. If there are any questions at any point, feel free to send those through the email at this contact. All right, so yeah, if you have any questions, no questions now, but if you have any questions, just message us there. All right, so that concludes this seminar. Thank you all for attending. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and also, yeah, so thanks everyone for attending, and this